It is now time to have a look at the radio button. Now, radio buttons allow us to make a single selection of the multiple choice. Under the input directory, let's create a new file and we're going to call it simply radio.view. Now, before we do anything else, let's open our components and let's register this new component. So we're going to use a view component and we're going to call it radio input. And we will require, and again, we're going to go to source directory, then components, then we have form, inputs, input, and radio. Then we need to make sure that we obviously require the default export from this file. So default. Okay, now that it's added to our view components, let's go back to our radio file and we're going to start with the template. We go for div with the v show when the show property is set to true. Then we have again class, all those things that we have in all other components. Computed wrapper CSS class, and as you can see, my IDE doesn't know where to pull it from, and this is because we haven't actually imported base input. So import base input, and it's going to go from, we go one level up, base input, and now we need to obviously make sure that this mixing is being used. So mixins within the array base input, and now this computed wrapper CSS class is available. So for the style, same thing. So style equals computed wrapper CSS style, and that's it for the wrapping div. Then we have div with v4. And we're going to be looping through the options. So option in options. And our options, so if we just go back to the base input, we have already this property here. And options will be what we are going to pass to this component for the list of radio buttons. So through the options as option, the key will be option ID. And then class will be checkbox group item. That's what we have in our styles. Then we're going to go for the inputs, and input will have a type radio this time. We will have ID coming from the option ID, and we pass option as an argument. But because we are going to be calling this method again, let's just create the variable on the go. So option underscore ID, and we use it later on when we're going to need this same value within the same loop. And the name comes from name property. We will have disabled coming from disabled. Then we have autocomplete coming from autocomplete. Then we have value, which will be represented by the option and its property value. Then we have for the model, we will have the property called checked. And the last thing on change, what we want to do, we want to update, call the method update. Okay, after this, we're going to provide the label, and label we have for option ID, which we created on the go here. And then v if we only want to show it when option name is present, and v text will also be option name. And that's our template. Now if we scroll down, we won't be using any properties. Then we have this checked property, which will represent our model. It's actually with the L at the end. There we go. And by default, it will take the value of the current value. So this current value, whatever we pass through as a current value to this component. Then we'll have methods, but before the methods, we're going to have mounted. And when the component is mounted, we first check if this checked. So if there is value associated with checked, then we will emit it. So this emit, and we pass this checked value so that our form will now have a value associated with this radio button. Okay, and then we simply initialize. So this initialize, and we also need to register listeners. So this register listeners, and that's everything from within the mounted. Now for the methods, we need to provide the implementation of the reset, clear, and then we go into override the update. So for reset, we will check if this current value, if there is a current value, then we go into emit it. So this emit, and we go for this checked. We're going to set it straight away at the same time as we're actually meeting it to this current value. And then we return because we don't want the statement to go any further than that. Otherwise, we simply clear the selection of this radio button. So clear. And let's now provide the implementation of this clear method. So clear, and the clear method will simply set this checked to false, and then we are going to fire the event. So event bus fire, and the event name will be remove field, and then we concatenate it with this group and the name of the field, so this name. So our form wrapper will then receive this event and will remove this particular input from the list of fields. Okay, the next method and the last one in this component will be the update. We take the event, because when the event happens on this given input, this change event, the event is passed through as an argument. And what we're going to do from within this update is simply emit as well. So emit, and we're going to set checked again on the go to event target value. So whatever value was associated with the given radio input. So that's everything within our component. Let's now open our view file. So we go into views, we have main and index.blade, and I've already added this radio input. You can see I've added new field set here and wrapped it with the div with the class checkbox grouped. That's just for the styling purposes. Then we have validation outside of the radio input, because obviously validation for the group of inputs doesn't have to be associated with a single input. It's going to be for the whole group. So validation, ID, name, show, and obviously all those things that we've already used before. Then for the radio input, I've provided the options, which consist of the name and value. We have a model which goes from props, fields, and city. Validation, it needs to be one of the following values, so 1, 2, 3, and 6, which are represented by the values of these options. And then for the current value, I've set it as 3. So if we go to the browser, actually before we do anything, let's recompile the file. So npm run dev. And if we now preview everything in the browser, refresh the page, you can see we have our radio buttons here. If I go to the form wrapper, and let's just filter for fields, that's what we need. Let's see, we have CTS3 for the Madrid, then we have Paris changes to 2, and so on. But let's now try and go back to our editor. And if we now remove the current value, I'm just going to comment it for the time being. And if we go back to the browser, refresh the page, you can see if we just go to the form wrapper again, fields, you'll see that we don't have any input with the name city at the moment, because none of the options is selected. But the moment I'm going to click one of them, you can see city has been added with the correct value associated. Now, one thing, if I refresh the page, you'll see that if I submit the form, we don't see any validation message. And this is because if we go back to the editor, this particular input is not required. We only want to check whether the value selected when it's selected is within this parameter range. So it's either 1, 2, 3, and 6. But it is not required. If it's not present, then we are not doing any validation. So the first thing we need to do is to add required to this if we would like to require this one. So required. For the validation, because we have validation outside of the tag itself, first of all, I've made a mistake here. We don't need these parameters. We only need to indicate which rule we want to display the message for. And the same goes for the one here for the colors. Again, minimum and maximum. We do specify what minimum and maximum should be on the input, but within the validation, we only are interested which rule has failed. Okay, if we scroll down now, we obviously need the message for this required. So I'm just going to put comma here, and before this, I'm going to put required. So for this rule, display this message, for this rule, when it fails, display this one. Obviously for this particular input, they both will be the same. Okay, if we save it and go back to the browser, now refresh, and now if I hit submit, you see that we have please select your city. Obviously that is now being validated. So we have now completed the radio button. In the next chapter, we're going to start working on the select inputs.